We're live. Okay, welcome to another DNN Community Hangout. I'm here with Will Stroll, and this is kind of a special session. Didn't we just do one of these, Will?
Yeah, I mean, a lot has happened since I've seen you. I mean, it's been forever. It's been something like a week, and I decided I didn't have enough orange, and so I needed to get another mic because I didn't like the sound on the last one. So we wanted to do this over again.
Yeah, no, I see the new mic, but you're gonna have to talk with your branding guy because the orange is just off a little bit.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna have to talk to that company in general. They're like, hey, if you're gonna do orange, do hotcakes orange. Oh man. Yeah, so this is a special episode. So we don't have a special guest. We don't have like a special agenda. We're not going to do that typical thing. What we're going to do instead is kind of dive into another area of DNN that the community can value or benefit from. And it's an area where it used to be pretty much self-explanatory. At least I felt so. It's not as much anymore, and that's the source code for DNN itself. It used to be pretty much a couple projects and the website, and that was the solution. That's not quite what it is anymore. It's a lot more than that these days. There's some build scripts, there's some bat files, there's MS build, there's all kinds of solution or projects in the solution. They're all pretty organized, but they're all over the place. Well, I don't mean that in a bad way. It's all over the place for somebody who hasn't seen it before, and especially for somebody who hasn't seen a solution that large before. It can be pretty intimidating. And so today is meant to like get people introduced to that so they can feel a little bit more confident about looking at it and touching it and doing something with it.
Yeah, no, and I totally get where you're at. I feel like that sometimes when I go, I've gone and looked at like the ASP.NET project and some of their source code, and you go into some of these other projects, and we at least had the benefit of joining DNN at a time when there were 10 or 20,000 lines of code. It was one project, maybe 4 or 5 at most. And today we're upwards of 50 plus projects in the solution. So just knowing what all of those projects are and where things are at, it can definitely be overwhelming for a new user coming in. So hopefully we can clear some of that up today and make things a little bit more discoverable for people and help people just go ahead and get started, much like we were able to, many moons ago.
Yep. And just like always, I'm going to end up sending a tweet out here in just a second, so people might get this a little bit late. But just like always, if you're watching and you have any questions, just tweet out to myself or Joe, and we'll get that answered. Or you can also comment on the page, and we'll get that up and running. So, or we'll respond to the comments and whatnot. So yeah, so let's kind of start to get diving into here, Joe. So why don't we just kind of get like an airplane level, like when you first look at it, here's what you're looking at.
Okay, well let's back up even just before that, because I think one of the things that's important for new users is like, where would I go to get the source code? If I wanted the source code. So DNN lives on GitHub in terms of our source code. So if let me go ahead and share out my screen here. Screen share, make sure I'm sharing the right screen. There we go. And now you should be able to see my screen here. So DNN, our source code repository actually lives out on GitHub in the DNN software, DNN platform area. So that just gives you, so DNN software, we actually have a number of projects, some of them private, some of them public, but DNN platform is the one most people are going to be interested in. And inside of GitHub, so if you've never been to GitHub before, you want to look at the code, and specifically in the development branch. The development branch is where we go for sort of where we do our nightly work or our daily work, right? And so this is the place where when you're ready to get source code, this would be the latest and greatest. Now, if you go onto the DNN website itself, so here, if you come into the community area, actually in platform, I think. Oh, sorry. The download, we got a big link right there at the top of the page. So if you go into the download area, if you want to get the source code for a specific version that we've released, you can go into the download for the platform. And I apologize right now, my bandwidth is a little bit low. We're sharing it for some reason. With the video and everything else, it's causing some problems here on the other machine. So bear with me for a second while that opens up. But anyway, so if you go to the downloads page, you'll be able to get the source for whatever the latest version is that we released. Now, we actually have our source code packages are located up on Codeplex, which is where we used to do all of our code development. And that was our repository for all of our source code. We've since moved over to GitHub, but in terms of the packages, I still like the way that that Codeplex does its release packaging and the ability for us to distribute off there. So right now we're using both Codeplex and GitHub. So Codeplex for packages that we're distributing, GitHub for the raw source code and raw version control. Okay, so once you get the source code, whether it's from GitHub or from one of these packages, you can open up and expand it inside of Visual Studio. And when you open it in Visual Studio, you're actually going to see, so this is the DNN 8 source code out of GitHub. So this is the latest and greatest. If you get DNN 7.4 or any of the prior to 8.0, you'll actually have a few more projects in there. We're removing some of the projects as part of DNN 8, adding others. So you're going to be right around this number, depending on your version. So this is effectively all of the source code for DNN. Now, I've collapsed a lot of these trees.
Yeah.
Because underneath here, you're going to get more projects, and each project has got its own source code that goes with it, right? The primary project for the platform is .NetNuke website. And again, this is one that's a little bit different for the older versions of DNN. So DNN 7.4, 7.4.1, and prior, we're all using what's called a website project format. So effectively, you had a URL localhost DNN platform here. DNN 8, we've actually converted back to a web application project, which is a different type of project that Microsoft offers in Visual Studio. And the web application project allows us to actually compile the core website. So previously, all of the files, all the code was just sort of loosely bound together underneath a directory structure. And that was the website project. In the web application project for DNN 8, we actually compile all of that into a single assembly, so we don't have as many loose files. And that helps us with startup time of the website. It also helps us in terms of performance on page loads and a number of different places. So it's actually a very good thing for the community.
So Joe, like stepping back a little bit here, what we're looking at, just to be clear, we're looking at DNN 8 right now as far as source. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's great, because that's going to be the latest, greatest thing. So that's good. Now I open this up and I want to kind of get started. And so when I look at this, I have all these things going on. When I first open up the source, should I be building anything? Should I be doing any configuration? And I know that depends on whether or not I'm just kind of like, peeking in, or if I want to actually participate. Is there anything I need to do here?
Yeah, so the first thing you need to do, I'm going to do one extra step here. Now, this is not something that you normally need to do. I've been actually building on this machine all day and building and rebuilding versions. So I need to go and I need to actually clean up some of my source code. So I'm actually opening up PowerShell here. And one of the modules I have installed in PowerShell is something called posh git, and it allows me to do some git commands. So it's running some scripts in the background. It's also got some of my DNN scripts that I use for automating things in DNN. So I'm just going to let this run. Should be done here in a second. So we should be able to go into the DNN platform. So this just happens to be where I keep all of my source code that I get off of Git. And so what I'm going to do here, so I can get my environment back to sort of a pristine state, what you would get if you were downloading source code off of GitHub. I'm going to actually do a git clean, pass it a few parameters here. And that's just basically going to wipe away any of those extra files that we don't store on GitHub. So all the stuff that I may have compiled, anything that might have gotten installed the last time I ran the source code. So with that, now I should have a very clean project. And you'll notice like this, this web config down here at the bottom, if I can get my machine to cooperate here. Oh. Hello, where did everything go? We don't like that. Come on.
I think we're zoomed in on your.
Yeah, we're zoomed in, but it's not. It's just not zooming in where I want it to zoom in. Let's see if we can do this a different zooming mechanism. There we go. That's a little better. So yeah, so you'll see like the web config right now, and it still doesn't look like you can see it in the share. It looks like
I can see it.
Can you see web config there?
I can see it, and there's a warning message or icon.
Yeah, yes, there's a little warning icon. The problem is my GoToMeeting or my Google Hangout doesn't show that because I'm zoomed in, so I'm not actually seeing what I should be seeing. But anyway, so yeah, so you get a little warning there, meaning that the file is in the project. The project knows about this file, but the file doesn't actually exist on disk. So that's kind of a oddity there.
So the project file has an entry for the web config, but the web config isn't in the project.
Correct.
Okay.
And this is sort of a carryover from our website project days. We actually will copy that in when we do a build. So if you look in this root directory, there's actually two configuration files. There's a development.config, and then there's also a release.config. And both of these are effectively the same configuration file. We've got a couple of different differences in there. Obviously, development.config, if you look down through here, you'll see that it's set up for debugging. You'll see that we have like some special items in the SQL data provider in terms of the, if we just scroll over here, we'll have a what we call an object qualifier. And so there are just one or two minor differences depending on, the environment. So for release, this is ready for production. Development, this is ready for development. So if I go ahead and do a build right now in debug mode, so I'm just going to do a Control-Shift-B, and that will actually start my build process and kick it off. And you'll see here, and this is going to take a couple of minutes. My CPU, I can hear it churning a little bit in the background with the fans and stuff.
Well, that'll give me time for a question. So Control-Shift-B for those that are not keyboard junkies like us, what would that be?
So that's a build, right? So that's basically coming up.
A regular build, a rebuild.
It's a build solution. So you can see over here that this is right. So Control-Shift-B right here, build solution in the build. So you with me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So that's all I did. I just kicked off that build for the solution, and now it's going through and it's doing the build. And that will make sure that I've got the web config copied down. So it's going to take this development config because I'm in debug mode, and it's going to copy it down to web config, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now I should be able to go ahead and open up this web config, and sure enough, I now have one. Notice also that my that the warning label is gone because now there's a web config there. And this may change before we get to final release. We're still playing with this a little bit, but this is the same whether you're on DNN 742 or 741 or prior, or whether you're on 8. We've always done this development and release config and copied them to web config based on what your build is that you're building. So
when somebody does this, it's still building right now. So when somebody does this, are there any differences that anybody needs to be aware of if they're on a different version of Visual Studio than you're currently using?
No, these are all the same. So I'm using Visual Studio 2015. We definitely support 2013 and 2012. I don't know if we still support 2010. I don't think we do, and we certainly won't support 2010 with the new DNN 8. 2012 and 2013 we should support because DNN 8 is moving to 451 or 452. I don't remember which one of those, but we're moving to a later build of ASP.NET.
Will there be any differences with the new Visual Studio? Because there's like the new, was it the community version or something like that? Where
yes, there's a community edition, and that's available in Visual Studio 2013 and Visual Studio 2015.
So will anybody experience any limitations with DNN source code with the community edition?
No, not at all. So and I'm not sure what this error is at the moment. It's in the designer file. I'm not going to worry about it for the moment. So the community edition has everything that you need in order to be able to build and run DNN. Now again, because we're in the middle of a fairly big change in DNN 8, and we're also looking at potentially in DNN 8 taking advantage of C#6. So that's still a question that's up in the air at the moment. And if we do use C#6 language, then you will need to use Visual Studio 2015 if you want to build and compile code. So
that's going to be a big decision. I know we were talking about that in the MVP channels, but I didn't even think about that. That's a good point.
Yeah, and the nice thing is with Community Edition, Visual Studio 2015 Community Edition, everybody has access to that. So it's not as big a deal. It's not like someone's got to go out and run out and buy Visual Studio 2015. If they're working on an open source project, they can absolutely use the Community Edition. And then the only issue there is whether a particular company might allow a developer to install 2015 on their machine. So there are some definite trade-offs, but we're leaning towards starting to take advantage of some C#6 stuff. And so this would be something that would be, if people, feel that would be a bad thing, let us know, post on Twitter, leave comments, whatever, what have you. But that's definitely something we're leaning towards for DNN 8.
So the build happened. We moved our web config down. Did anything else happen that's maybe specific to the DNN source code?
Yeah. So because I did this in the debug mode, so you see we've got all of these modules, right, that we had, and all of these different projects that are in here. And in debug mode, what happens is all of the necessary assemblies, all of the ASCX files, anything that might be in here. So if you see like these HTML and there's a .less, and so all of the relevant files get copied over to the appropriate place in this website directory. So if I were to look inside desktop modules, for example, And you see in my project, I don't have a bunch of directories, but let's just open this up in Explorer and see what we have. And what we're going to see, and had I shown you this before, it would have been clean. But now you're going to see a whole bunch of directories under here, because behind the scenes, as part of that build, we were doing a bunch of file copies. So, and that's debug mode. Debug mode is really like after you have your site up and running, you want to do this debug build so that you can keep copying over things from the project, individual projects, down into the actual website. So I'm actually, since this is the first time I haven't installed anything yet, I need to do one other special build, and I need to go and do a release build. Now I already have a web config, so our build scripts won't copy the release config down. We already have one, so I don't need a web config, so we're safe there. So it's going to do this release build. And so let's just go ahead and run this. Again, I'm going to just do a Control-Shift-B. This is going to kick off another build in release mode. And now the difference in release mode, if I'm going to come back here, let's just go into my website and go into these install folders. And let's look at, say, the module install folder. And if you look here, there's nothing in there, meaning there's no modules to be installed. There's nothing to do. So if I were to try to install DNN, right, run through the install wizard at this point, nothing would happen. I would get some core platform functionality, but there would be a lot of things missing. And most likely I would never even get through the install process because there would be so much that's missing.
So for somebody who hasn't seen a source before, the install folder is used during the install clearly. And then each one of those folders mostly matches up to an extension type. And then when you first install DNN, these particular packages that are in here that are zip files get installed as part of the install or upgrade process. So,
right.
So that's a very powerful place, especially if you're doing some sort of like hosted solution or something like that. You can automate some things.
Yes, you can see in the background as things are building in Visual Studio, you'll see files get dropped now into this install modules folder. And likewise, there's some other folders in here as well that are going to get created with the various projects. So all of those things will slowly but surely start building up in here. And when the build is done, then I'll have everything in the install folders that I need. So typically what I do is I build in release mode because I know the things that I need to change in the web config if I want to do debugging. But if you're new to this, I recommend do a debug build first, then do a release build. And then if you want to, you can go back and do a third debug build. But really, you just need the two. The only time you need the release build is for building these packages. Otherwise, I stay in debug mode all the time.
So if I'm doing this for the first time, so we have some basic steps that you just mentioned. You know, we put the source in, we build and debug, then release, and maybe another debug, and then we perhaps might be able to run the site. But let's say we started one of these builds and something went wrong. What's the most common thing that you've heard of going wrong in that build?
So something didn't copy right to the right location, or you may not have had file permissions set up in your directories. So something may not have been able to copy. You might even, depending on whether you just grab the latest source code out of GitHub, you may actually have a bad branch or bad source code, because there are times, believe it or not, when something gets checked in that won't actually build. Now it shouldn't.
Developers don't do that.
I know, but we have poltergeists on the project, and occasionally they'll come along, because I know a developer would never do that. But poltergeists, however, they will mess with your check-ins, and then stuff won't build. And if that happens, just reach out, post something in the forums, and someone will get back with you. And usually within a couple hours, or certainly within a day or so, there will be a new build or a new set of source code up there so that everything builds. I mean, we're literally doing 5 or 6 builds a day of DNN as we check stuff in throughout the day. Sometimes it's a lot more than that. So I've done 5 builds already this morning. So it just depends on what source code's getting checked in. We do everything through pull requests. So even though we check in a lot of source code during the day, it's not really until the pull request gets processed and merged that you actually see new builds get kicked off and stuff show up in the development branch. So if I go back here into, let's go to GitHub real quick, and you'll see we've got a ton of different branches where people may be working on different bug fixes. So we've got bug fixes up there. We've got branches where we're working on different feature items. We've got branches up here for different releases that we may be working on. So like 7.4.2, I've got a branch up here where we're trying to get that finalized for the final 7.4.2 branch. And then we've got some stuff where we're just doing some research around performance improvements.
So let's go back to the development environment though. Like when I'm using this, because we go over some of that stuff in the video, and we'll put the Git video in the we'll both Git videos we'll put into the show notes. So source code here, because I want to get to some of the projects and kind of like dive into some of those a little bit in terms of what they are and why I might want to touch them or look at them. But when I'm dealing with the source code, do I need to worry about anything with in terms of any NuGet packages? Do I need to do any updates? Should I have or not have any specific extensions put into my environment?
Yeah. So one of the items in Visual Studio, and we keep this on by default in our projects, is and I may down here, buried in here, there is going to be a setting, and I'm missing where it's at the moment.
So a little trick I like to use in Visual Studio is that quick launch up there. If you know the term, it'll just take you right to it on the top right.
Yeah.
So yeah, close out the options and just type it into the quick launch, and it'll tell you everything that matches your terms, including things in the option menus and whatnot. It's pretty sweet. So you can see the options menu there right in the middle. So you can go to general or package sources.
Yeah, so we've got, so what we normally have is NuGet is set to allow to download missing packages. So we do use NuGet in DNN, and when we do a build, it should automatically pull down all of the relevant bits of information that you need. So now we should have, assuming this finished, and it did, so now we have all of our source code is built. Now we can actually just come over into our browser here, and I'll kick the process off. And I'm going to go to localhost_DNN platform. Now I'm using IIS. I've already set up this site in IIS, and I've already got a database set up. Actually, let me do one last thing here. I'm going to run.
For our viewers, like setting those things up are not; those things are not unique to DNN. So, like if you've ever set up a .NET App Web application in IIS or whatever, those things are all standard. We don't have any special configurations for SQL Server or IIS or anything. You just set it up like you always do. Yeah.
So just create an empty SQL Server database and set up an IIS website. We use localhost /DNN _platform. It's sort of a legacy historical thing. But so this is localhost being the default IIS website, and DNN platform just being a virtual application underneath that website. So with that, we'll go ahead and kick this off. And what will happen is DNN will start running, our application will start running. It'll figure out you don't have anything in the database, and it'll realize that you haven't done an install yet. So it'll automatically kick us over as soon as the application starts up, it will kick us over into the install wizard, and this is going to take a little bit.
So I don't want to dive too much into what's happening there because we have plenty of resources on that, and we can put some of those install resources in our show notes as well. Yeah. So another part to my previous question was like maybe it's more of a preference. Like for example, I love to run with Web Essentials as an extension installed, and I also love to run with ReSharper. Are there any extensions that you would suggest for our community to use?
So I actually Web Essentials is definitely a must if you're doing web development. I know some people like ReSharper. The other one that's my personal favorite is CodeRush. So it does a lot of the very similar to ReSharper. It's just a set of tools to help you as you're coding do certain steps a lot faster. Visual Studio has incorporated more and more of what's been traditionally in CodeRush or ReSharper, and so either one of those tools is really good. I think if you're not running CodeRush, you should run ReSharper or vice versa. You know, one of those two I think is kind of necessary, just because they add a lot of productivity enhancements into Visual Studio. So you know, and I've used both and find that there are different things that each one does well.
So I'm not sure about CodeRush, but with ReSharper, they don't advertise this, but it's clearly put on their website. If you are an active open source developer and you maintain your own project, like you can't take advantage, you can't claim this with DNN, for example. But if you build some DNN modules or some other open source projects, you can actually get a free license of ReSharper. You just have to make sure you maintain your project and it's active over time. Does CodeRush have something similar with that?
I don't know what they have for the open source side. I really haven't ever explored that. I've been using them for quite a long time, and as a former MVP and an ASP insider, you know, I can get licenses fairly easily. So, you know, and I have good relationships with those guys. So there's definitely something. If you're interested in CodeRush, you know, reach out to them. They're very supportive of the community and you know, people who are doing development and open source. So. But I honestly don't know what their stance is on specific licensing for open source.
So at this point, you should have like the install wizard up, and you should be able to just use the site, right? Like everything should be up and running. And
yeah. So install wizard's up, and I would normally step through the install wizard, right? Put a password in, and it's set up all. So I did something. So I cheated a little bit here. So. I did this command that I have I built up a bunch of PowerShell scripts that I use, and I've got this one called reset DNN dev environment, and that actually made some SQL entries in my web config. It also deleted any old database I had in SQL Server and created a new blank one. So it just sort of reset my environment for me. So normally you would have to come in here and put your SQL Server info in, but anyway, so yeah, so we're just gonna let the wizard run through its pace.
So is PoshGit available on Git? I know it's one of your projects, but is this something?
Yeah, it's not currently available. There's still some pieces in it that are hard coded to my environment. I've got a really old version that's available up on GitHub under PoshDNN, I think. Oh, PoshGit, sorry, wrong one. PoshGit is available, and I believe it's available on GitHub. PoshDNN, which is my stuff for DNN, is not yet available.
But we have an old version of that on CodePlex.
Yeah, there is an old version of that on CodePlex.
We'll put those in the show notes.
And I do intend to get the DNN scripts updated and posted up. I know that there are a number of places in my scripts where I make some assumptions about directory structures and the like. So,
even if you have that like in the portion you put up, like they just comment out maybe the stuff that's specific to your environment and say, hey, fix this when you fork it for yourself. You know?
Yeah. No, I actually, and I don't want to get into the PoshDNN stuff at the moment, but there are some settings and things with that. It's just there's some other places in code where I've been a little lazy and hard coded some things. So
developers never do that either.
Yeah, well, it's a personal project.
Yeah.
I've been using these scripts for going on 8 or 9 years now. So every time I do updates, I try to clean up some things, but then I've got new features that I add, and so it's constantly in a state of flux. But there are some nice nuggets in there, like resetting my DNN environment and the like, that really help me, because I do so many builds every day, of DNN, or certainly every week, not necessarily every day, but.
So this is taking a moment, and I think people will believe us that this runs. I mean, we have enough people doing the same thing that you're doing. So let's kind of dive into the source a little bit more.
Yeah.
So we have these different sections, and so the first section here is we have DNN platform. So that's everything that's part of our open source project that everybody can freely download, and that people are using today on numerous public websites, right? So
Right.
Within there we have all these different solution folders that are kind of broken out into different areas. And so like maybe we should just like go one by one and say, okay, this is what this is, and this is how it's used and why you might look at it.
Okay. So in the admin modules area, so as part of DNN 8, we're actually breaking out all of the things that used to be in our admin area, or admin or host menus in DNN. We're starting to break all of those out into their own separate modules now. So we've got a number of these done, and we continue to add more each week. And so hopefully by the time DNN 8 ships, all of our modules will be here rather than buried down here in this website. So those are in the admin modules. Build scripts are just scripts that we use for building all. So these are the scripts that actually do the packaging. They do the copying of all the files to the appropriate places. And they're used both by modules as well as the core platform. So you generally don't have to do much with build scripts.
Yeah, I want to return to build scripts at the end of this, right before we stop, because there's something interesting that I had to discover on my own that people might be interested in.
Yeah. So the JavaScript libraries, these are basically, DNN supports the ability to package and deploy various JavaScript libraries so that any module developer or any skin developer can actually say, hey, I just need jQuery, put it in the page for me. And that keeps us from having conflicts between two different modules that both want to load jQuery. Since you ask the platform for a copy of jQuery, you only get one copy loaded on the page. So that's what the JavaScript libraries are. It's the common things that we use: jQuery, migrate, UI, and then the knockout stuff.
So with those folders being there, the build scripts do they create the official DNN extension of a JavaScript library?
Yes, they do. So
okay.
Part of our build scripts actually will package this up, and it'll deploy down into the install JavaScript, or one of those install folders. And then we've got modules. So we've got various modules. Some of these are admin, some of these are not. So we've got like our new dynamic content creator. We've got both the manager and the viewer. We've got messaging, our menuing system, just a whole bunch of different modules. We'll probably do some cleanup here in DNN 8 to clearly differentiate between our administrative modules, things like the content manager and the digital assets, versus our modules that are intended to be dropped on pages and used by users, like the viewer, the DDR menu, HTML module. So there's a mix in here right now, and that'll get cleaned up in DNN.
Yeah. So if somebody wants to figure that out today, all they have to do is do a clean install of DNN, and then you can go look in the admin menu and can see, okay, these are the modules that are admin, and then everything else is not.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we've got this thing called MVC modules, and this may actually go away before we're done with DNN 8. We were going to put modules that we're building using the MVC pattern, but it's a little bit confusing because it's like, why these modules here and not in the modules folder and the admin folder? And if you actually looked, the dynamic content viewer is actually an MVC module. So if you look through here, you'll ultimately see we've got views in here. Those views are CS HTML. We've got our controllers. So this is actually an MVC module in our regular modules folder. So this, you can ignore this MVC modules folder for now. Our provider folder.
Some of these, the naming convention is .NETNuke dot, and that's clearly because historically it's been .NETNuke and not DNN, and then some of them are DNN dot modules. Are we moving towards changing all of our namespaces that way, or is there?
We're not changing all of our namespaces. As we build new modules, we're putting them in the new namespace, and we're doing that so that some of these older modules, if we started changing namespaces, or older code, if we started changing namespaces, we potentially would be breaking things. So only as we create new modules are we using the new namespace.
Yeah, and so for those that might be asking, well, why not just do that and make everything the same? Don't forget that there's an entire ecosystem of people just like you that are using this, and we could basically break our entire ecosystem.
Right. So we try very hard not to do that. There are some cases where it's warranted and necessary. So in the provider section, these are basically piece extensions that generally don't have UI. Although there are some exceptions to that. It's really about things that get plugged in and you can swap. So you can say, today I want to use this editor as my HTML editor. You can make a web config change and use a completely different editor. And everywhere where that editor was used in the site, it would just change. So that's what providers are. Very different from modules. And they may or may not have UI. A lot of them don't. Support projects.
Well, before we get to support projects, so when we think about providers, when we think about modules, and even the JavaScript libraries, one of the things that I have historically used DNN for in terms of the source is, you know what, I need to fix this problem. And this problem might be in DNN, it might be in another project I'm working on, but I know DNN does that here. Right, like I can think like, oh, I want to do this really cool thing with UI, or I know there's this logic that tweaks things over here, and maybe the HTML module does it. Like, here's source that gives you the idea of like, okay, here's how somebody else chose to solve that problem, and you can find that right here. Or you can use this, and maybe it is a DNN project, and you can say, you know what, I want to build something just like the HTML module or something similar to it, and then you got that module right there, and you can use that as a kind of a starting point or a guide for your own development.
Right, and so actually we have a pull request outstanding right now where someone looked at how we were building authentication providers. They saw, oh, we've got Facebook and Google and Microsoft Live and Twitter, and these are all OAuth providers using various flavors of OAuth. And they built a new one for LinkedIn, and they built one for some other OAuth place that I'd never heard of. Now the LinkedIn one will probably come in. This other one is a sort of a one-off situation, so likely that won't come in. But yeah, they just start with the source code. What's that?
When you say come in, do you mean be a core feature?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, they submitted a pull request with these authentication providers. So we'll probably accept the LinkedIn one, probably not accept the non-LinkedIn one, just because when we think about these, we think about, how widespread is this feature? How many people could actually or would actually want to have this in their system? If it's a very, very niche feature or a bit of functionality, it's probably best to let it stay and live out on GitHub in its own project, maintained by that small niche of users, right?
Yeah. Sometimes people don't realize that they are in a niche, because like, well, everybody I know loves this thing, but
right.
That's not the reality. So we have like 2 minutes left because I know you have a hard stop today, Joe. So we have a couple of other projects left here that we haven't kind of discussed. And so we got HTTP modules, library, WebRaiser, WebMVC. Why would somebody want to dive into those, or what are those used for?
So the biggest one, and the one that's the most important for you to know about, is .NetNuke library. So this is really the heart of the platform. So all of our entities, whether it's things about modules or portals or tabs. You might know them as pages, URLs, users, hosts. So most of our core system entities live in this location. A lot of our core framework pieces live in this location. If you got questions about security or about how we deal with files or caching or different things, most of that lives inside of the library. Now, in later years, we started breaking things out. So web has more of like some of our web components and different bits that are very web specific. So like we even have in here the model view pattern or model view provider, I think, or model view presenter.
Yeah.
So this is an old project from one of the guys who's now with Microsoft. And so MVP is pretty much dead, but this is where it lives. A lot of UI stuff. So all of our DNN web controls sort of live in here. So all of the customized web controls that we've built up over the years live in this location. So some of these other packages are really sort of support packages, but the library is the key one. So beyond web, so some of the new stuff we're doing with MVC all lives in the web MVC folder. Stuff around Razor host lives here in the Razor project. And the new stuff that we're doing in 8, you can tell just from the namespace and the naming here around dynamic content, it has its own core library.
So I have one final question, because I know we have to cut this off, and I'm sure there's going to be other things that people want us to do in the future. But one of the things I discovered on my own was, like, what if I wanted to build my own DNN package? And there's these BAT files that are in there that allow you to do that are pretty powerful. And so I think those are in the build folder here, but you'll find them in the root of the DNN source, if I remember correctly. What are those for, and why might somebody want to choose to play with that?
So the batch files actually allow you to do builds and compile everything. And so there's.
I think it's in the DNN platform root, or maybe just above that.
Yeah.
There it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's some of our build scripts, but you'll also find the batch files, right? So this creates an install package for you. So the same thing that we use and we deploy in terms of making available when you want to get just, here's a zip file with everything you need to install DNN. So this will do that for you. This other one will create an upgrade package. Again, there are some things on upgrade where you don't want to overwrite like your web config because you may have customized it and done other things. There's several files within DNN you don't want to override or overwrite on upgrade. So that's the difference between the install and the upgrade packages, is just the things you don't want overwritten. The upgrade sort of guarantees that. So we also have a couple of different types of solutions, right? So the one that I normally open is platform with tests. So it's just this platform one, but we also have one where there's no tests. Charles is working on one right now that's just got all of his dynamic content modules that we're working on. There's another one that's just core that doesn't have a lot of the other support projects. So probably doesn't have web or web MVC. So we have a couple of different solutions there depending on what you're working on or what you want to look at. Realistically though, if you open platform, it's got everything.
Yep. So basically, if somebody wants to choose between them, it basically depends on, like, if I just want to focus in on this and not see or deal with the performance of building everything, like, I can do that one thing.
Right.
Yeah, so I think we've done a really good overview of the source. If anybody wants to know more, or if you want us to do another deep dive into any particular topic, please let us know. You've seen our Twitter handles on our view when they come up. So I'm at Will Stroll and Joe is at Jay Brinkman. Just let us know or drop a comment, and we'll do another special episode for you. But until then, we got some more episodes coming up in next month, and you'll see that mentioned in our show notes as well. So Thank you, Joe, for helping us in the community learn a little bit more about everything that is DNN platform source at this point.
And thank you, Will, for joining me today. I'm always interested in talking with the community about how they can take advantage of DNN and some of the different things that we do to build it and maintain it. And we're always looking for new people who want to get involved. So this is a great way to get started. Start with source code and go from there. So.
Yep, and if you're afraid to, just dive in and you want somebody to kind of hold your hand, just ping us, and if it's not something we can help with, we'll definitely get you in touch with somebody that can. So, we're always embracing our new community members, and we love to have people participate. So just let us know. Very
touchy-feely today, Will, talking about.
Yeah. Well, I love the community,
embracing them. Yeah.
Hey, I run the DNN training working group, and we're all about embracing the new people.
Just remember, personal space, Will. Personal.
Okay.
Anyway, thanks everyone for joining us, and that's all for today.
All right. Bye. See you next time.